I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 72 of Hellbent for Horror. We have a special interview today with two filmmakers who have been creating some of the most intriguing and thought-provoking horror films of the last decade. Justin Benson and Dan Moorhead, best known as the creative team Benson and Moorhead, have specialized in micro-budget films that defy easy classification. They also defy the look of their very small budgets. You know, you can feel the wild originality of movies like Don Coscarelli's Phantasm and Coscarelli's John Dies at the End. You can also see the enigmatic camera work of Peter Weir's early films like Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Last Wave. But it's the stories that these gentlemen decide to tell that truly set these films apart. These are tales of the supernatural, written by skeptics who believe the supernatural is really nature that has yet to be figured out. And yet, these filmmakers are skeptics who yearn to find real magic left in the world. Their first film, Resolution, in 2012, told the story of a man who imprisons his estranged junkie friend in an isolated cabin at the edge of the San Diego desert. He basically tries to force the man through a week of sobriety, but the events of the week are being mysteriously manipulated. And that's all I'll say. Hey, magic needs its secrets. Their second film, Spring, from 2014, has a young man in a personal tailspin who flees from the United States to Italy. And there he sparks up a romance with a woman who is harboring a dark, primordial secret. And now, their newest film, The Endless, which is available on video on demand on June 26th, is their most ambitious film to date. The story: two brothers return to the cult they fled from years ago to discover that the group's beliefs may be more sane than they once thought. Now, this episode is a joint episode where I team with Bradley J. Kornish and Dan Pullen from the Four Brains One Movie podcast, and I'm really grateful to these guys for the show. Justin and Aaron were kind enough to give us their time to talk about horror, magic, skepticism, cults, the theater of the absurd, and even their own first kisses with horror. Now, due to their very busy schedules, Justin and Aaron had to call us by cell phone from Florida and from LA, so I do apologize that the sound is occasionally, cell phone rough. I do hope that you enjoy the show as much as we enjoyed making it.
Hi, this is Bradley J. Kornish. I am the host of Dinner with Lynch and co-host of Four Brains, One Movie. For tonight's show, we're doing something a little bit different. Dan Pullen and I will be holding our very first dual-release podcast. I know that sounds pretty exciting and frankly mildly inappropriate, but all that means is we are doing this show alongside a favorite podcast of ours, Hellbent for Horror.
That's right. Thanks so much for allowing me to be on here. Just like it took two studios to bring us The Towering Inferno in 1974, today we have a show so big it took two podcasts to contain it. And I am S.A. Bradley. I'm the host of Hellbent for Horror. I'm here to remind you that you used to love horror movies and you secretly still do.
And this is Dan Pullen, co-host of Four Brains, along with Bradley. And we welcome to the show Justin Benson and Dan Moorhead. Welcome, guys.
Hey, guys. Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thanks for being on our show. I know that you're both in two different locations, and we got you over the phone, so we may cut in and out a little bit, but we're just going to keep going and just see what happens here.
Honestly, there's so many people on this call that I'm pretty sure if I drop off or something, someone else can just pretend to be me, and we can get away with it. Yeah.
That's one of the points why we have so many people. Sometimes I just suddenly take a nap during the podcast, and then Dan will just keep rolling with it.
Yeah.
I just occasionally wake up and say something really generic and be like, "Oh, that's Aaron. Okay, got it. All right."
So I want to start with a question to you guys. First off, a little bit of a statement. How much I really appreciate the three films that you've put together so far. I am a horror aficionado. I'm a movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. And I love to show on my podcast how diverse and beautiful horror can be as an art form. And that's why I'm excited about this episode, because I feel a sense of theme that is very reminiscent to some of the things that I really evangelize on my show. And it can really be summed up by some dialogue from one of your characters in the movie Spring. Just because you haven't seen something before doesn't mean it's supernatural. And I really appreciate when people start to delve into the gray area between nature and supernature. You quote Lovecraft in The Endless. I think, in fact, you name drop him in the film. But I kind of see a little Algernon Blackwood, who was the writer who originally came up with The Wendigo, and he also did a story called The Willows, which reminds me a lot of some of the things that are in The Endless. I'm not sure if you guys are fans of him, but there's this whole deeper feeling of supernatural being organic, a part of nature that's just deeper in the woods, still a mystery. Do you have a philosophy, since you brought up both Lovecraft and I brought up Blackwood? Are you building a group of stories around a philosophy, and what kind of philosophy are you working on?
Oh, it's interesting. We've never had that question before. I don't know. I don't think we're working on a philosophy specifically. I wish I could say we were. We'd sound probably way smarter than we actually are. But what we are into is innovation. We really enjoy inventing our own mythologies, as opposed to sort of repurposing mythologies that have been around for a while. Like we probably wouldn't make a vampire movie, but we did make a movie about a 2,000-year-old woman who metabolizes her own embryonic stem cells, and who other people interpret as being a monster. So yeah, I don't know. I guess there's a philosophy of innovation, but yeah, Aaron, what do you think? Do we have a philosophy and we don't talk about it?
A little bit. I think the philosophy, just in terms of how we approach the supernatural, where it's both highly, highly skeptical,
Right.
and also simultaneously, we are so hopeful that there is more. And I have a Christian background just as an atheist background, and it kind of merges right in the middle with our movies, where if somebody said, "Hey, I've got this house, I swear to God it's haunted, and I'll pay $1,000 if you think it's not," I would stay in that house until I got to see something. That would just be the most fascinating thing in the world for me. But unfortunately, both Justin and I do not think that ghosts, at least in terms of the idea of being like, oh, deceased people, their disembodied souls haunting the earth. We don't believe that kind of a thing exists, and extrapolating that out into a lot of things. But actually, Justin, who was it a couple days ago that said, "Oh, I don't believe in the supernatural. I'll just have an extremely broad, I have an extremely broad definition of what is natural"? Who said that like a couple days ago?
That was, man, we are both so bad with names.
That was,
oh my God,
that was me.
it was like 2
I'm
days
going to
ago.
take credit for that one because that sounds pretty good. But I'll just take credit
It
for
was
that.
actually it was a producer who was, I believe, formerly an executive at Lionsgate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So
that was
how
it.
smart this business can be.
Well, that's
Smarter than
great
us.
to hear that, because that's kind of the mindset that I have on it.
One thing that I do like about that philosophy or idea, a writing idea or story writing idea, is that the possibilities are pretty much unlimited, and that's one thing that I loved about Resolution, and especially The Endless, was my mind was going bonkers with all the open possibilities that could be happening, and curiosity as far as which way you guys were going to take it.
It was also very organic. You didn't over-explain things, but it wasn't difficult to understand. It was just a nice, smooth ride, even though it was very different than many other kind of sci-fi or fantasy or horror elements?
Yeah, it was a trip. I mean, it really was very, very natural, and it wasn't like you guys were trying to make it natural. It wasn't like you were throwing in like kind of overlapping dialogue like Clerks or something like that. You know, what you were doing was something, especially when I watched Resolution. I saw Resolution before I saw The Endless. I saw Spring a while ago. But when I saw Resolution, I got a hold of Scott, and I'm like, Scott, you should check this movie out. And it was something that I was immediately impressed with the how well you guys were able to hold the natural dialogue and hold it within a really interesting storyline as well.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, there's a weird thing with our movies where, you know, almost all filmmakers are sort of allergic to exposition, and a lot of viewers are too. But you know, filmmakers, we do try to always, you know, keep, you know, verbal explanation down to a minimum. But our movies are tricky because it would be very easy to make a version of our films that are like totally incomprehensible, and so through the whole process of screenwriting and of editing the movie together and making it, we're always trying to figure out ways so that people understand. They literally they understand. Hopefully something like 90%. Most audience members will get 90% what's happening. You know, some will get 100. But that it's, you know, again, we're oftentimes innovating things and they require explanation within the story. So we're always trying to figure out ways to deliver that information that doesn't feel like exposition. While also simultaneously making sure the dialogue always sounds like things that human beings would actually say.
Right.
Which is always tricky too. But it's also kind of a stylistic thing for us because there's lots of filmmakers who their intent is not to have that level of naturalism. Their intent is to have very big heightened moments that could only occur in a movie. But yeah, I think with our naturalistic style lends itself well to telling stories of the otherworldly in a way that hopefully has more psychological impact on people, because the hope is we get you to actually believe in it for 90 minutes to 2 hours.
Right.
I was about to say the exact same thing, Justin, except I also clearly fell off the call for like a minute.
So with Resolution and The Endless, you know, there's a huge connection between those two stories. Were they always written together? You know, when you produced Resolution, was The Endless there waiting, or did it kind of grow more out of that?
It was a slower process where, we'd finished that movie, and when we were making it, we didn't know if we'd have jobs after we were done. We
Right.
just went back to like working our craft day jobs and stuff, and you know, it having a little bit of some success really helped us. But we never thought, we were never so into ourselves as to think that there would be like a shared universe of our movies. But it stayed with us. It stayed with us for quite a while, where we'd have some drinks at a bar and be joking around about what some of the characters were doing. We realized like, oh, these people sort of exist outside of us in a weird little way. And so when we decided to go make a DIY movie, just something hand over fist that we could just go make ourselves and, you know, self-reliant as possible and all of that, one of the things we had at our disposal, in addition to, you know, our own abilities and the locations and all of that, one of the other things we had is the mythology of Resolution, that we just realized wasn't completely fully told yet. And it still isn't completely told yet, but we don't really know what the piece that isn't told is.
So you'd mentioned shared universe. Do you consider Spring to be, kind of in the same world, or is that totally separate?
Yeah, it's in the same world. There's little clues,
Okay.
the first like 5-10 minutes that kind of make it seem to be in there. I mean, it's not quite as overt as the other two movies, but
Right.
if you look really hard, you can find it.
Okay. All right. I'm primed for a rewatch. This is good.
Now, Shitty Carl is the common thread, isn't he?
He's one of them, yeah.
He's one of them, yeah. If I may, I know that we've all been huge fans of these movies, but could you give a very brief synopsis of Resolution for those that may not have seen it yet?
Resolution's about a guy who imprisons his estranged junkie best friend in a cabin in the woods and forces him through a week of sobriety. And the events of that week are manipulated by something. And that is that question of what it is sort of the central mystery of the movie.
One of my favorite scenes was with Bill Oberst. Yeah, the thing I liked about that scene the most, you were talking about exposition, and I was expecting that scene to be kind of a big exposition scene, and it kind of started out a little bit like that, and then it just kind of spun out of control. It was brilliant. I loved it, and I was like, "What the fuck is he talking about?" And the guy, obviously, in the trailer with him, is like, "What the fuck is he talking about?" It was great.
Yeah, by the end of it, you find out it's not exposition at all. It's more confundities added to the pile.
Right. So I think one thing that strikes me about the three movies that I think is really cool is that everyone is kind of drawn into their fate through some form of emotional trauma. It reminds me of how Shirley Jackson had in The Haunting of Hill House. Eleanor is going to be the one who gets sucked in, and Brad Anderson's Session 9, the spirit basically says, I live in the weak and the wounded. And you've got drug addiction for the first one. You've got grief and kind of a loneliness that's in the second. And you have a loneliness and a major regret, the abandonment issue that draws these guys. And it almost feels like the videotape. It's almost like a Videodrome vibe. Like, I'm wondering when the obsession starts, because in the first movie, Mike abandons his wife and goes on a crusade, even though the video is insane. And he has to lie to get there. He has to continue to lie as if he's already obsessed. And he kind of goes on this nightmarish scavenger hunt, like he's caught in a daydream. And I kind of feel the same thing happens with the two main characters in The Endless as well. Is that intentional? Because why I think that's interesting is I kind of feel like there's a cosmic thing going on here, though. There's not really a bad guy. They may have just landed in some psychic trash, cosmic litter, or if there is an elder god, I don't know if it's necessarily, it could just be an aberration in physics. You guys keep it open enough. Is there a real bad guy in their movies?
Man, that was great, by the way. I just liked how you said that.
The cosmic trash part was awesome.
This is why we have SA on the show. He raises the levels quite a bit.
Can we interview you about our movie for a bit? Because that was wonderful. I think you're no, actually, that is, you hit the nail on the head, and I won't say too much. But I completely agree with your interpretation of it in a lot of ways. In some ways, it's one of the reasons why I found Annihilation so terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
The third act and the bear scene and all of that. But I think when you say, is there a bad guy in our movies, there's almost never an actual bad guy in anything we make, and it's just because Justin and I are optimists, and we just don't believe in bad people. We more believe in just like good people doing bad things for all their weird reasons. And look, I would never get into an argument with somebody to say, yes, there are no bad people. There are bad people. They exist. It's just that I don't understand them, so it's hard for me to make a movie about them.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to like make a character that I believe in. I think that's what it is. And then I'll toss that baton to Justin.
Yeah, I in terms of the the sort of unseen antagonist of both Resolution and the Endless. I don't think that this unseen antagonist, the deity, I don't think it operates out of malice.
Mm-hmm.
And but I don't think it's aware of either malice nor doing good. It operates, like you said, more like a natural force that makes things go a certain way, and it likes to create conflict, oftentimes using stories.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's weird. It has objectives, but it doesn't have it doesn't even know what morality is.
Right.
And I guess there's a similarity there with Annihilation. I guess there's a similar idea there.
Yeah, it would be like saying that like a lion kills a gazelle out of malice. Like that's not quite the word, you know.
Right.
It's more just out of like a natural process of hunger.
Yeah. I actually just did almost the exact same words in my last podcast, which was about faith and religion in horror films. And because I was in a cult myself as a kid that believed that demons were right next to you all the time, I was telling someone about how, you know, even after all of these years and after the deprogramming and all that stuff, I still occasionally have these moments where I'm afraid of demons, that they're like sitting around plotting to kill me. And the person looked at me, this is a apocryphal story, looked at me and said, you know, sharks don't think this way. You know, crows don't think this way. They're just eating. The only thing that's malicious in the universe is you and demons. How boring of a life of nonstop existence would it be for them to just sit around trying to get you to slip on a banana peel? Can you wake up from this stuff? So I really appreciate the idea that there's a non-malicious thing happening here. In fact, for those that don't know, The Endless, there is two of these stories take place in the desert in San Diego. And of course, deserts tend to bring crazy people to them. People want to get away from the rest of civilization. And so you have this weirdness that's happening inside of this story. The Endless has a group of people that may or may not be a cult. There is the word cult that's bandied about. But I'm wondering, because it almost feels like theater of the absurd, this all of your films, actually. There's a level of comedy right underneath the horror. Is there actually a cult that went to the desert, or did it become a cult once they were there for a while?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Like there was the gal, I don't think this is spoilery, but the gal who was kind of wandering off the insane asylum. and it just ended up being brought into the fold, which is really kind of interesting, because with my childhood as well was a bit culty. I went through a period in California. I was involved with from about the age of maybe 12 to 15. I'm 52 years old, so this was back. This was quite a while ago, like around 1979, 1980. But it was when the whole born again movement was happening in California, and I was with a church group that was pretty extreme in some of their ideas and thinking. They had some ideas like I talked to them about. I had a lot of great questions like, did Jesus ever laugh? And then they like chastised me, like, no, of course, because it's not in the Bible. He never laughed. And I'm like, well, what the fuck am I doing here? Being part of a religion with somebody who's never laughed, you know? But it was just being around that sort of that cult thing where people just turn everything over to the group. And watching your film, The Endless, brought a lot of that back, you know. And even like some of the creepy camps that we would go to, the group would just get like these random camps that we would go to for our summer camps, and they were like just like the fucking camp in your movie. So
Well, we shot it at a camp that is utterly not creepy. It's actually a wonderful little place, but it is a children's kind of summer camp. And I grew up not in a cult at all, but in a religion. And religious summer camps definitely have their rites and rituals, and they have their what you would call their idols and their traditions and all of that. And in retrospect, if you shot grainy VHS footage, ominous music, it would look terrifying. It really would look. It's a real thing. And by the way, for both of you, I'm sorry to hear that you had those experiences. But actually, I'm kind of curious.
Makes me colorful.
How did those experiences? Yeah. How do you think those experiences have shaped your worldview?
Oh, that's a great question. Bradley, do you want to go first?
No, you go first, because what I'll do is I'll probably just kind of alter what you say a little bit so I sound intelligent.
You'll steal all my stuff. Yeah. So that's a great question, because one of the things that I think why I like your movie so much, and of course I know that one of you is an atheist, the other is now agnostic but grew up Christian. One of the words that I've heard you say a few times so far is skepticism. And if I got anything out of this, was a good, healthy skepticism. I was a young child in the 70s when this cult, and it's still around, it's no longer really called a cult, but at that point it certainly was, because they were saying that the world was going to end in 1975. So in some ways I wouldn't have had to go through the bicentennial, which might have been nice, but it was very strange to truly believe that, have everyone that you knew believe that the world was coming to an end. And where it becomes very culty is that you are separated from everyone else. Everyone else is uneducated compared to what you know. You have the truth. You have this thing that's going to keep you alive. And people weren't going to the dentist. They weren't paying their taxes. They're probably still not paying their taxes, actually. But lots of people did not get medical attention because they believed that there was going to be this ascension that was going to happen in 1975. And when it didn't, I was crushed, because to me, I went through this whole thing of being the sword of justice for people. And I had to go through the slings and arrows of saying that everything was idolatry and all sorts of crazy stuff. So there was no payoff for me. I bled for this thing as a 10-year-old, and nothing happened. And my parents and everyone else stayed with it and just said, well, we got the numbers wrong. But for me, I was done. God, mom, and dad were wrong, and it was terribly traumatizing. But I was also too young to leave, right? So I found myself becoming very skeptical about everything. And I mean, a lot of cults also teach you to be skeptical about everything except the cult. So I knew a lot of ways to unravel people's religious beliefs. I had read the Bible multiple times. Well, their version of it. I'm not quite sure how much of it is in everybody else's Bibles, but I learned to be an orator, to try and bring people down on what their beliefs were. And that's one of the things that really excited me about the two characters. And I don't want to monopolize anymore, but at some point I'll probably talk a little bit more about this, on how I felt the two characters related to people that I knew. But Bradley, how about what do you want to bring in there?
Well, when I was, I guess with the cult, I call it a cult, but it was really just a fucked up church. And a big church, like kind of an early mega church. And but what I was drawn to was the human connection. And everybody gets together and they all raise their hands and speak in tongues and sing hymns, and there's just a warmth about that. But what happens is, if you confront that in any way with any level of intelligence or any level of questioning, then they turn on you. And that's what happened to me. So I was basically, there was like rumors started about all kinds of fucked up shit, because I was asking the leader of my Bible study questions about like Jesus laughing and stuff like that. And to me, it just showed me that it isn't, and it kind of let me down a little bit, about a higher being, thinking that I was kind of tossed aside. But it really taught me that people are in control of that. It's the people. If they want to be assholes, they'll be assholes. So it really turned me into not necessarily an atheist, but more of an agnostic, where I still believe that there is something out there. There's absolutely shit out there that we don't understand, that I don't get, but that I probably will never know or understand. But as far as any, deity that's like gifting out stuff, I'm pretty sure that that's not the case based on my experiences. So I guess basically it turned me into a really negative person. I'm kidding.
See, in the long run, it turned me into a very positive person. But I'll say that I went through every one of the emotions. I've been every kind of thing I think it can possibly be, any definition on spiritual thought. And I've kind of found myself in a kind of humored spot. It's kind of humorous to me now. It's kind of pleasant and got me into science, got me into all sorts of things that I may not have gotten into had I not been put through the ringer in that way.
See, I should have taken Scott's answer.
No, actually, there was something I really liked about your answer where you said that when you basically say, "Oh, it's all just humans at the top," and it's just like, "Oh, there's no power structures that don't end in some person or people," and I think that's actually a really healthy thing. That's not negative at all. I think if you're not like, that can, for example, the government is just this, this crazy thing, and you're like, the government is a group of people that is literally the end of it, and it's fine, and you can actually look at it skeptically, which means your answers kind of tie together in a way. So no, I really like it. It doesn't sound like it made you negative, but maybe it did, but that doesn't seem like a negative to me at all.
It's a good kind of negativity. It's filtered out into writing and occasionally chastising people that deserve it. So, like Dan. Sorry, Dan.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm I guess the only person that isn't in the cult here on the podcast. I am trying to make a cult out of this podcast, though. So hopefully we get some
terrible cult.
Yeah, it's a horrible cult so far.
But one thing I did find, you mentioned that the camp was kind of a kids' camp, and it was actually a lovely place. Lou Temple, hanging out by the shack with the giant padlock. I'm pretty sure I had a couple of those at the camps that I went to. Yeah, he was fantastic in the Endless.
Lou's a great guy. He's really interesting to work with because he has these really long conversations with you as the director, and they literally go for like hours, just talking about the character and the story and talking about philosophy and life and all these types of things. And it's all really lovely, because he's one of those people. He has all that charisma and that interesting voice, and he or at least he seems really wise. He actually is. He's a really smart guy. But it's interesting because you do all that, and after about 6 hours of it, you start to wonder. You're like, what is up with this? Like, what is all this for? Especially since he doesn't have very many lines, and then someone yells action, and then you see your hours and hours and hours of conversation come out in like 3 seconds of performance, and it's really fascinating to see someone do that.
I have to say, one of the things that's really is the sound design that, even in Resolution, there's that song at the end that feels so haunting, but there's so much sound design, sound effect work that really pushes both movies, but especially The Endless through, that I think is it's highly commendable, and it's something that I'm not necessarily sure you always see in lower budget films. So obviously that meant something very much to you style-wise.
Yeah. We probably spend more time on sound than a lot of other filmmakers. It is something that's extremely important to us, and I'd say like the process basically starts when we're editing the movie, because we edit our movies ourselves with a third editor named Michael Felker. But as we're editing, as all editors, we're temping in a lot of sound, but I think we take it a little more seriously. That we're exploring, we're trying to figure out what does these invented things we're making up in these stories, like what do they sound like, and exploring those during the edit, and then we go into a premix with this guy, the sound designer / mixer that we've worked with on all of our films, named Yael Dooley, and he's kind of like our third director. And in post-production, I think post-production is almost sort of, when I think about post-production, I just basically thinking about sitting behind Yael with Aaron and exploring new sounds, talking to him about like, oh, why did we temp in a certain sound, and why isn't it working, and having him make it good. And also, it'd be interesting for you guys and viewers to know that before our movies are sound mixed, they're terrible.
Scott and I just recently did a podcast on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And one thing that I was really surprised about is when we talked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we had another gentleman on it. I think it was Christopher Funderburg from Pink Smoke. He's like a brilliant movie guy. And we ended up talking like half the podcast was about sound and the sound in the movie. And I think that actually plays an equal role.
I'll share a weird anecdote. Is we recently did this event called Scripts Gone Wild that started in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where they get about 20 of us together, and it's like a ticketed event with alcohol sponsors and everything like that. And you read a famous script, and you assign roles, and there's like an audience and all of that, And the reason you do that is because every time that you mess up your line or you say one of like a couple words that are all, you have to take a drink. And so by the end of it, you're just sloshed, as is everybody else in the audience. At a certain point, you just call it a night. You're like, well, we're not getting through this, so we're on page 45, And we did it with Jurassic Park. And there was one person whose whole job was to just do the sound effects. And that person knew all of the sound effects from Jurassic Park. And I know Jurassic Park back to front. And this guy really knew like how and when and exactly what they sound like and all of that. And you realize it's just like, weirdly enough, these tiny little things have actually become iconic, but you don't even realize that it's like, oh, you could just hear that sound and you think like one sound it's a split second and you think of an entire movie. And you can do that with split frames too, depending on the movie. I can recognize any frame of There Will Be Blood, but that's to say that sound is important is something that we never really get into, because we don't really ever get to talk to the sound people, and they don't really ever get to talk about what they're doing. And actually, if anyone ever wants to interview Yael, he probably has some incredible stuff to say, because he had to create out of whole cloth the sound of something that doesn't exist. Like whatever, as you were saying, the cosmic crash is that's going on in the movie. It doesn't have a throat. Like, so what does it sound like when it makes noise?
Right.
And it had to be consistent with across the entire movie, so that when you hear it in its lightest form, it reflects it in its strongest form. And then also, there's this, man, I'm trying so hard to dance around spoilers, and I'll just stop.
I know.
There's lots of sounds that must repeat themselves, and you need to know what they mean when you hear them. Is that big enough? Never mind. I'll stop there.
Let's slide you out of having to worry about the landmines of the spoilers and talk a little bit more about the center movie of the three, the second film that you made. And of course, I want to talk a little bit of magic because we just talked about how much you are devoted to sound. One of you is a cinematographer. The other writes and acts. There is the director. Brains are there. So you are involved in all of the sciences. And so I'm not surprised at all that you guys are filmmakers, because filmmakers, science meets magic, right? All you need is every other art form on the world to be able to create a movie. And your movies seem like they're always complex dances between science and magic. Like you want to figure things out. You seem like pragmatic guys, but a little magic that you can't figure out for you is kind of like comfort food. You're not frustrated by it. People who are scientists in the movies, the psychic in the third film, doesn't seem frustrated or angry as much as he feels melancholy that he can't figure out what's going on. So what magic in your life or in the universe do you hope is real?
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Even at the most basic level, it would be great if ghosts were real, because that means there's an afterlife, and we get
right.
more than,
and entropy.
Yeah, and then we get more of more than our allotted years. It's interesting, everyone else told their like spiritual background. It's interesting. This is Justin talking. We were talking about how I was raised atheist, and that's a really interesting thing of like you're raised told that there isn't magic, and then you come across all these things that actually do hint that there is if not science we don't understand, something beyond all this, and it's kind of like brought me into being agnostic despite being raised atheist. So yeah, like I have my hopes of what like things are. Like at the most basic level, it'd be great if ghosts were real, because again, it's like, okay, there's definitely an afterlife, but there's definitely a whole bunch of there's a lot of comforting. I've encountered a lot of comforting unknowns in my life for sure.
I just watched a movie for the first time, front to back. Uncle Boonmee, Who Can Recall His Past Lives. Are you familiar with that?
No.
It's a Thai movie. It's wonderful. It won like the Palme d'Or like in 2010 or something like that, which is around when Resolution came out. So I'm just guessing that you guys didn't win the Palme d'Or on that. No, I'm kidding.
No. Oh wow! Just rub it right in, dude.
Yeah.
Every
Don't
day,
worry, you can get those on any.
Every day, somebody calls me and whispers into the phone, "You didn't win your Palme d'Or at Cannes." So.
You should have though, but I think with yeah. Anyways, I think with watch that movie, because it's what you were talking about with ghosts being real. It is really a neat film. It's about a guy who's dying of kidney failure, and he is sort of floating in and out, but he has like naturalistic conversations with dead relatives and animals, and it's really cool. And it's like, and actually your movie Resolution and The Endless especially kind of floats around almost in that same universe, where like with Shitty Carl stomping around in The Endless, to me that almost I was almost thinking like Shitty Carl was a ghost-like character, and it's and I was immediately like, yes. I love really kind of strange, unpredictable things, but it's not like you stop the film and you say, hey, look at this, it's really strange, it's really weird, it's really scary. It's to me, that is actually that seems very naturalistic, and if there is a spirit world, if there are ghosts, I'm just assuming it would be just a normal conversation. Like, I wouldn't run in fear. I'd probably just sit down and have a chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because like most of our films follow some kind of a, what I guess you could call like a pseudo logic, where we just kind of suppose there's one little difference in the world, in the natural world than we thought it was, and we kind of extrapolate that out into a movie. That's not always how it starts, and often isn't, but that's the idea, where it's just, you only have to swallow one big pill, and then we get to see all of the craziness that follows, right? But and that definitely was one of them. And in fact, that was something we didn't even quite realize, I think, until post-production, was that people might think that he is. We thought of him as ghost-like, but more in just the way that we were dealing with the scene itself, where we were thinking the way we would choose to shoot it and the way that they would choose to interact. But we weren't thinking that anyone would literally think he's a ghost until post-production. And then we realized that we needed to actually accentuate that. And there's little choices actually in like visual effects and the edit and the music that made it so that we tried to, Sheedy Carl in particular, stomping around his little loop, was somebody that we wanted to actually use that as a bit of a red herring. And I think the idea is that you're latching onto when we're talking about it, because it's a double-edged sword, right? Is if there is so sorry, let me back up so I don't just.
Yeah, I like what you're saying.
We just saw First Reformed, and we won't spoil it, but it's a devastating movie that in many ways has to do with it's unbelievable, and in many ways it has to do with the fact that this is all going to end. No matter what, it's all going to end. And
right.
And it's really weird, because when you think about it, that's a terrifying thought when you really start thinking about it. And then you think like, well, what's worse than that? It's like, well, what's worse than that is if it doesn't end. If there's
right. Exactly.
And it kind of, and maybe it's better, and maybe it's worse, and maybe it's all a modulated thing. And but there's a terror to that too, and you can play with both, because being a human being is confusing.
Well, I think one of the most frightening things for a human being, even more so than annihilation, is damnation, and that's what I took away from the Endless, was the damnation almost of being caught in a loop, but not necessarily in a mystical sense, like in your film, but almost like in daily life. One of my takeaways from the movie was it was actually kind of motivating. I was like, after I told you I saw it with my loved one, just like it said on the poster. And and one of the things I told my wife on the way home is I just said, wow, this like really motivates me to get out of these loops that I'm in. It's like you might have just a loop where you go to the same bullshit job every day. Deal with the same bullshit and over and over again. And it was, my question for you is, did you guys actually understand that your movie was kind of motivational in that sense, or inspirational, in where it would get people to think about their own lives personally?
Well, we would never make something intentionally motivational specifically, but everything we do is intended that the viewer leaves the movie and they keep thinking about it, and that hopefully we've addressed some sort of universal human theme, and you can apply the virtues of breaking out of a loop you could apply that to your interpersonal life, your family life, your spiritual life, your work life. And yes, the intent is that with this movie, with that theme specifically, you would think about it, continue thinking about it through the prism of that, whatever you have going on in your life. If it actually motivates you to make a positive change in your life, that's a huge compliment. I don't think we've ever discussed that but that's pretty cool. It'd be nice if we created something that inspired someone to make some sort of positive change in their life.
Yeah, and it's funny, we kind of asked you guys about some of your influences in the films that you liked beforehand, and I did watch 20th Century Women, which you guys recommended, but you also mentioned Almost Famous. These are movies that, in large part, it's about people finding themselves and kind of finding their way through life. I feel in a lot of ways that you guys incorporate that, but at the same time, you're incorporating that into horror movies, which is something that might be a little tough to reconcile for some people.
Yeah, we haven't really thought about it too much in terms of how do people wrap their brain around it. We try really hard not to, because if we do, then we start falling into formula in a way. But we were never sitting in a room thinking like, let's combine a coming of age character drama with horror. That would be that's something that comes last. What comes first is trying to make something that feels very emotionally present and hopefully emotionally unique in cinema, but not to people. It's not like an esoteric film to grasp onto. And then we find that in the weird. We find that in something that we find strange about the world, or could suppose is strange about the world, and we let them go and mess with each other. And I think that is probably what ends up resulting in what people have called genre bending or something like that when we're looking through the construct of genres. But ultimately, in my opinion, it's a horror movie that focuses on character, and I don't think those two things have to be two mutually exclusive things.
Yeah, especially with Spring, and one of the things I was thinking about as I was watching that is something that Bradley and I touched on when we were discussing Martin by George Romero, in that you could recut that movie in several different ways and have it not be a horror movie. And that's one of the things that kind of propels it and makes you care about the characters. I got that a lot of that was Spring, because that is really a movie about two people. And, you could take that movie and you could change what her secret is. You could, she could have cancer. She could maybe she used to be a dude. I don't know. But whatever it is, that thing that she's hiding from him could be different. But the fact that the connection between those two characters is so strong is what drives the movie.
Yeah. That's always the hope for us, is that we spend enough time with the characters, and the characters aren't only expressing plot, which happens sometimes.
And
that they're expressing themselves as unique individuals that feel like they're actually living, breathing human beings, and not just archetypes popped into a movie. And also, like, I get what you're saying. It's like, oh, can you take the movie and could you potentially re-edit it as like not being a horror film? And it's like, oh, I can kind of see how someone might be able to do Spring. I think, but the point is, I think ultimately Spring would not actually make sense if you edited out the genre components. And I actually think that's important. I think it's important too. I think it's really important that those things are basically inextricably linked, if that's the right word.
Okay.
And that like the story doesn't happen without the genre component. I think that's as important as having good characters.
Well, it brings me to a question that I have for you guys. And you have aspirations of being almost like considered an auteur, sort of team, because you guys the level of what you're doing right out of the gate with Resolution, Spring, the Endless is definitely an elevated level of budget filmmaking that you're doing. And I'm excited about. I saw all three films. I was excited each time about the three films, but the Endless just really showed me how far you guys can go. Do you have aspirations to do something like a non-genre film at some point that might actually be seen by a wider audience or anything of that nature? Or are you just going to continue to make super cool unhinged films like you've been making so far?
It's a really broad answer. The biggest part of that is like we would love for our films to be seen by more people, whatever form that takes. We are always drawn to just whatever we happen to be drawn to, and often that tends to be something that's very left of center. Often has some, it's weird to say genre component, but just some component of just something that's just weird about it. But that said, though, we often have kicked around ideas for, say, a Western, and which is still kind of like on the fringes in a way, that we feel like we could absolutely do. We're going to be stepping up no matter what, out of the micro budget space, because it seems like there's an appetite for left of center genre stuff. It's growing and growing all over the place. I mean, you guys see The Leftovers? It's one of the best things I've ever watched.
I love The Leftovers.
Yeah. And so I hope that answers your question. We very much intend to make movies that are seen by a much larger audience, if we can.
Well, The Leftovers could have definitely existed in your universe.
Yeah, that's an honor to say. Oh my, thank you.
Well, I have to say that I was stunned to find out that Spring would be considered a micro budget because it looks so amazing and it feels so confident in what it is. And it's one of those films that I agree completely that it wouldn't make much sense, or it wouldn't be profound if it didn't have the genre piece to it. It's almost like playing Jenga with only like 3 pieces as opposed to all the multitudes that you would have by what you do with the genre here. And why I champion this movie as much as I do on my show is that I feel that it is this wonderful examination of I think you mentioned it before. It's very confusing to be a human being. And in this movie, we have an ancient human being that has gone through different versions of evolution. And the whole movie, in my mindset at least, is looking at how invasive species, like he's an invasive species to Italy. She's an invasive species to humanity as it stands right now. She's been able to watch humanity go up and down and crumble. It's like reverse Lestat from Anne Rice. She's actually, kind of allowing herself to be involved in it in a way where she's kind of like many of the animals that are there, lizards that are hiding on doors, trying to blend in, spiders trapping flies. We see the earth and the insects all the way through this film. We get this idea that nature, is hungry, and nature also is kind of out of context in this. And she finds this confusing human being that somehow balances this weird scale that she's got going on in her own crazy hormones and these genetics that are going all over the place. I mean, a movie that's going to give me an idea of an uplifting end that also talks about like gemmels, an osculation where 2 trees graft together. And you have the eye thing, which is heterochromia. Is that it, with the 2 different color eyes? You have all of this opposites attract stuff that's going on. And there's this supernatural, it's not supernatural, right? It's not supernatural. It's natural that we don't quite understand. Having all of that work together is like this great mature fairy tale that has a great monstrous feel in the center of it. And I really think that there's nothing but greatness in this film. So I want to tell you, it's one that I really go crazy for, because I think that it really says a lot about emotional connection in a very strange way. And, the moment anyway, I will stop from going down any further roads on that. But I did want to speak to the idea that there's all of this feeling in that film of how things meld together, things evolve, everything's kind of out of place, and it all comes together at the end. And I think it's a movie that should be seen much more than it is, and it certainly does not feel low budget.
Oh, thank you so much, man. It was interesting hearing you talk about spring, because I think that was the most we've ever heard someone talk about it, where it sort of sounded like you were there with us hearing our conversations while we were making it. And it brought back lots of memories of developing that movie. But yeah, everything you said is right on. And interestingly, Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat was sort of an inspiration in the writing process. And that, first off, I hope everyone knows that's like one of the kind of a great work of literature, actually, in terms of popular fiction. But there was something always about that book, as wonderful as it is, as historical fiction, basically. There was always a thing when you're reading it where you're like, why is Lestat so mopey? Like, why is he so? And there's a good reason why. That he's damned in a way, right? He's stuck watching, people he loves pass away century after century, and he sees his immortality as a curse. And you get it, you understand it, but it just seemed like we had never seen an immortal character dealt with in a way of like, what if there was an immortal and they were a humanist and an optimist, and they enjoyed the good things in life, and thus the immortality was mostly an advantage. And that when she meets this guy, as just for whatever reason, that thing, like, why do people fall in love? It doesn't have to like make sense. It just happened. After 2,000 years, she met this guy who's like, from what you know about him, he seems like he's a pretty good guy. He's interesting enough, but he's not, like, she probably met like swashbuckling pirates and
Cortez
and star Roman soldiers and things like that. And in that sense, Evan's a little unremarkable, but to us, that was like what was actually very realistic about them falling in love, is that they're both good people, but there doesn't have to be like a specific reason. He doesn't,
right.
He doesn't have to be. It's not Excalibur getting the sword. It's not that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's not King Arthur pulling Excalibur because it's the perfect one, and for whatever reason he's magical. But it's just something else, and that's like kind of a beautiful thing about life, is people fall in love for all types of reasons and that are almost impossible to explain.
Right. Well, I'll say that the courtyard scene, their first meeting, I think is really a brilliant piece of work, because you're the beginning of the movie, we're in San Diego, and San Diego is very unattractive, or it's very average, muted colors. It's very gray. The places that we're looking at are bars, and there's a weird haze to everything. And then he's in Italy, and even Rome is kind of drab in its own way. It's very pedestrian. But then as he's driving down to this coastal village, the sun hits the screen as they're going into you can see the sea behind it, and he starts to cry. And at that moment, it's like we go into a whole magical different movie. And at that point, everything becomes a portal where brightness is there. We get the God's eye view from these drones where something seems to always be watching. And I think it's very interesting that you have an eternal character that lives forever who contemplates the existence of God at certain points. But when he goes into this courtyard, first time you see it, it looks like it's just, boy meets girl, but he's kind of on the lunch menu. She has an ulterior motive for sitting out there and being the bright red thing that's in that courtyard. And I love how when the camera comes in, it stops and turns to see the old men playing cards, and then it goes up to the belfry and we see the bells going off. So it is like, okay, something is watching every moment that's happening in this scene, and it's a kind of like a predatory setup. He's just kind of walking through, maybe wants to get laid, but she has ulterior motives and has no idea that he's going to be what he becomes. Her first thing is she wants to just have a quick screw and bite his head off if he's a mantis. But, there's that whole thing that it turns into something else. And that makes that scene on second viewing very, very interesting to watch.
Oh, cool thing. And actually, it's fun because that scene was originally, it was like, well, it was one sentence, and that's about what it would be. And we were originally going to shoot it in regular motion. We weren't even going to shoot it in slow motion. At the last second, we kind of talked about the motions that were the emotion of the scene that we needed to make it feel this dreamlike thing. And to us, we were two guys in the most beautiful little part of Italy. We just thought everything we pointed the camera at was dreamlike. And then we realized that this could actually just end up being a musical moment, a little bit like In the Mood for Love or something like that. We didn't realize that in the moment. Right. We only realized we ripped it off later. But that is, that is slow down and focus on that moment. Not just of the meeting of, oh, these are our two romantic leads, but that there's that she's definitely got something going on. If you didn't see that, if you saw that basically 4 times faster, you would have missed it.
Mm-hmm. I could almost see you guys transplanting Evan's character in other films or other scenarios, because he kind of seems like he has your point of view a little bit. The fact that he's surrounded by or encountering something so strange and he's accepting of it it's almost descriptive of how you guys are dealing with some pretty wild shit, and you're very much at ease with it, which is what I love about all 3 of your flicks.
Yeah, it's an interesting viewpoint. I honestly never really thought I had that much in common with him, but But in that regard, for sure, because I think we approach it, the supernatural or with just curiosity before horror, and I think that's why.
Well, one thing that I'm not sure if you guys pay attention to this stuff. I know lots of folks that I talk to on my podcast really don't pay a lot of attention to the ratings and give much credence to Rotten Tomatoes and whatnot. But your movies are really highly rated. Resolution is 100%. Endless is 96%. Spring 88%. You have to be one of the highest percentages of directors that I've seen. So congratulations on that, if you're even paying attention to it.
Yeah. It's interesting. You can't not pay attention to it as a filmmaker. But we've made 3 movies where we just were basically allowed to do whatever we wanted, and very fortunate in that way. A lot of times, a filmmaker makes 1 movie or 2 movies, and then, if they get an opportunity to do something much bigger, and there's a lot more collaborations, and but in our case, we've just weird circumstances. We did 3 indies where it was just total, complete control. These little movies, and then they go out into the world, and you just have no idea how well they're going to be received by critics and audiences. But it's all been really, really positive. Just just following our instincts and making movies that we'd like to watch. And that's all you really do as a filmmaker. It's interesting when you get it, when you also it hits right with the critics and the audiences and all that. But it's also something where it's like, oh, okay, well, it's happened 3 times now. Maybe if sometime we make a movie that we love, it's like, oh, we wanted to see this movie. and maybe we'll have a Rotten Tomatoes dip, you guys. I don't know, but it's been really neat to have like 3 movies that for whatever reason, without making it going like we want to get a high Rotten Tomatoes score or whatever.
Right.
That it's worked out that way has been just a really neat. That's obviously like a really neat thing. It's been fun to experience.
How long have you guys known each other?
We met as interns in 2009. So I can't do math very well. So what is that, like 100 years? Like, I don't know.
At least.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, 3 indie films.
Holy shit! And you've only known each other for 9 years.
Right.
That's
nuts.
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it is weird to me. I feel like I've been doing this forever, and I've been making movies forever. But we've only just started. We've only just started. I mean, we've like Resolution came out in 2013. That's 5 years ago.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's but it feels like that's been my life since as long as I can remember at a certain point. But it is really nice when I think about it. It's like, 3 films in 5 years, and I feel like that's slow. We have so much to go, and that's exciting.
And VHS Viral, you did a piece on that.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, so 3.5 or 3 1/10 or whatever. I like what we did for VHS. I think it's it was genuinely, it was a ton of fun. It was stressful and difficult, but it was a ton of fun.
Good.
I actually just watched it for the first time today. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? It's really interesting. Very recently, something's happened where, like, once or twice per screening, sometimes 3 times, someone will come up to us and say, "Oh, hey, I really enjoyed the Endless. Thanks for coming out and hosting the screening, whatever." And be like, "Yeah, I discovered your movies from your segment Bone Storm and VHS Viral." And it's so different than the rest of our movies, but it's so cool that that's been a way that people have discovered our features.
Right.
Well, there's a guy, David Bruckner. We just
we know. We love that guy.
Yeah, we just talked about his movie, The Ritual, and I saw his segment on Southbound. That's how I got turned on to his stuff. So it actually has a good positive impact doing those segments.
Oh,
and a
yeah.
lot of people watch those movies too.
Yeah, I follow. I say that all roads lead back to Larry Fessenden, the New York independent guy. All of these tributaries have come out of Glass Eye Pix and him starting in like the early 80s. And it's amazing how people who were directors or sound designers have really gone and taken other people under their wing. It's kind of like France in the 20s and 30s, where all these artists just suddenly came together, except it's kind of low budget filmmaking. And I'm astonished by the fact that 5 years, 3 movies, so many people who are making independent films, even micro budget, they might be trying to get funding for 5 years for their film, and then they're waiting for coloring to be done for the next 2 years and stuff like that. How for this movie, it reminds Resolution reminds me of Coherence, James Wyatt Burkett's Coherence, where you have this really imaginative idea, but it's all like prop motivated and done by keeping an element of surprise for the actors, and they're just kind of coming up with it on site. You seem as if you rehearse a hell of a lot more. But when you're doing this kind of thing and you've got a very limited budget, to say the least, how do you work on the writing? Are you trying to come up with an idea where, okay, I know that there's this children's camp. Can we write something around a children's camp and come up with something cool? Or do you write an idea and then go, holy shit, where are we going to find a children's camp that we can shoot all of this? Because there's so much idiosyncratic stuff that's in Resolution. I can't help but feel like this was, okay, we're going to throw every bit of production value we both own and put that together in this thing and make a really cool idea.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of especially Resolution and the Endless, before a script was written, there was a list of things that we have access to that could fit a loose story concept. And that sort of like like if Aaron and I taught an indie filmmaking class, that's day one stuff. That's day one. That's like don't write for locations you don't have access to. Don't write special effects you can't do or can't afford. Stuff like that.
That sounds like the story of Carnival of Souls, where you wrote the whole thing around that one location.
Oh wow! I didn't know that. I know that's what we do we tend to do with our movies. Even Spring is kind of written all around a location. It's just that we were so naive when that story was developed. It was written for the Amalfi Coast, which is like, oh, you can't actually shoot an indie film there; it's too expensive. So we in another region of Italy, but these centuries old towns, they all they all kind of fit the same template, luckily. But it's definitely just working from a list of stuff that you have access to that hopefully it's interesting, hopefully it gives the movie scale, and not ending up in a situation where it's like, oh, you developed this whole thing and now you can't afford the location, or you have to make some huge compromise, or you had this like idea of some big thing happening in the third act, and then the movie's done and it looks like a YouTube video by a 10-year-old,
Right.
Right.
But it's
well, like sometimes that's the best thing in your VHS viral thing. You were shooting in a I grew up in Southern California, so that's all you remember is just the cemented waterways with all the graffiti in it.
Yeah.
So it's such a great location.
That was so hard to find, actually. It was really hard to find a location we had access to. Yeah, it was written to be something where it's like, oh, we'd be able to find this. These are all over the place. Aaron, do you remember how long it took to find that location? That was
we had to go to skate parks and be like, hey, little kid, where do you guys go skate? And we had to go like I'm not even joking. And we're like, hey, little kid, do you want to be in a movie? Like it was the weirdest. Right. And we had to ask them. And the thing is something about skate culture is you don't want to tell other people your skate spots because they'll get either watched or out or overskated, or you don't want to tell people. But actually, like we got and they're not like on maps. They're not. They're on satellite images, but you can't just like give someone an address. You have to get directions and go find it. And luckily that one was one of them. But man, did we think it would be easy? We thought it would be so easy to find. And it ended up being in the middle of nowhere and like in some place where there was like a dead body in a ditch next door.
Wow. Well, my recording studio that I have here, and people that listen to the podcast regularly, what I do for Brains of a Movie, what I do is I record at my local library. So I just heard my announcement, which gives me about 15 minutes. So I wanted to wind down a little bit. And the one thing I wanted to tell you guys was I think how great it is, and I think it's working out for you quite well. But how great it is that you're communicating directly with your fan base, and how open you are. I noticed you've done other podcasts. I like the fact that you guys are doing your pre-screening or post-screening Q&As. It's just so nice to see, especially from some talented dudes that are obviously going to go places. So it's nice that you're kind of before you are able to afford your own helicopters and shit like that, you're at least at street level with the people, with the little people.
Honestly, I've done most of this whole podcast in the back of my helicopter with some really good noise canceling. But I like that you think that I am one of the plebes. But no, it's honestly it sounds like a platitude, but the pleasure is ours, genuinely. I mean, we don't make these movies to exist in a vacuum. One of the things we talked about earlier is like we do make our movies to be seen, and when we find out that our movies are seen, but that people take something from it to their own lives, and we can find that through social media and through these screenings and all that. Truly, the pleasure is ours.
Nice.
And if anyone wants to communicate with us, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Justin H. Benson, and Aaron has one too.
Mine's it's at Aaron Moorhead, but you'll probably want to just Google my name because you'll spell it wrong. It's got a slightly weird spelling.
When is the video on demand happening again? Because that's a big deal. I think you guys, I'm excited about it. With the Ritual, when that just came out recently, that hit pretty hard. And the horror community really got into that really quick. And I think your film is going to have the same sort of hit. And I'm wondering, what is that date again?
That is June 26th. I did say the 23rd earlier, but it's the 26th, I believe. I think I was wrong. It should be everywhere, including Blu-ray and DVD. But basically, if it's a place that sells movies, you should be able to get it. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I've been told. I think the best place will be iTunes, followed quickly by Amazon. Oh, and you can pre-order it right now. Not to keep on shilling, but I just remembered that that's actually a thing that just happened recently. So,
all right, shill away.
No, I'll definitely be putting a link to the pre-order stuff too.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. I just have one last question. I'll make a quick statement as well. I'm really pleased and excited to see where you fellas are going to go next, because I do feel that this is a really interesting bend that you have on where the horror film can go in the form of narrative. And it's very exciting to me. And since you are seemingly fans of the genre, one of the things that I do on my show is I talk about The First Kiss, the movie that caught you and made a lifetime of you having to make horror movies of your own and stuff. What were your first kisses? What was the movie that just drove you through the roof?
Ooh, it's funny. I can't say this is the one that made me want to make movies. I couldn't actually tell you what movie that was. For me, it was a person. I met two brothers named Julian and Eric, and they turned me on to filmmaking as a hobby. But I think my first film that just got under my skin in the biggest way was probably Jurassic Park. I'm sorry for a lame answer.
That's a good one.
It's iconic to say the least.
And
there's parts of it that were fucking terrifying.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is a lot of people that I hear so often. I hear like, oh, I don't like horror movies. And I'm like, well, you like Spielberg movies, right? Yeah, of course. It's like, well, Jaws and Jurassic Park, they're creature features, like straight up creature features. They're just particularly well done. I think they just don't like low budget slashers from the 80s. And that's a totally different conversation.
Love low budget slashers from the 80s.
People usually define horror by the movie that they hate, and they just assume all of it is that.
Yeah, this is Justin, and the movies that inspire me to be a filmmaker in the way of like, oh, I saw these movies and I thought I didn't think it wasn't like watching Jurassic Park where it's like, oh, this is so amazing in every single way and has this huge grand scale to it. But in that I saw these movies and I thought, I think it's within reason that I could do that in some form or another. And it was Richard Linklater films in terms of like, I enjoyed the language of them, the dialogue.
Yep.
And I thought that if I worked really hard at it, I could learn how to write dialogue. Whereas to say like compared to like Jurassic Park, where it's like, oh, there's a dinosaur. I don't know how to do that. It's awesome, but I don't know how to do it. And I don't know. I can't imagine ever knowing how to do that. But when I would watch Richard Linklater movies, I'd see like the language and like, and within that language, like a humanity to it. And I was like, okay, I think maybe if I worked really hard, I could maybe do that. And it was that. And from a technical standpoint, I remember watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and thinking, there's like, this is imperfect, like the performances are a little too big in places, in my opinion, things like that. But I understood how it was made when I was watching it. And I was also thinking, this is very effective. I feel really uneasy and really unnerved, and I have the thrill of being scared. And I think, and again, I thought, I think I could understand how to do that, how to execute that. So yeah,
That's well, thank you for the answers. In fact, you kind of did attain Richard Linklater, because the last quarter of spring feels very much like Before Sunset.
Exactly. Yeah. I think if there's one thing I want to close with, it's I don't think we mentioned Vinnie Curran.
Yes.
On this, and God damn it, man, he especially Resolution, he made that movie for me. He's wonderful. So, gush about the actors again if you can.
Oh man, Vinny's an unmatched, brilliant genius, and we are lucky to even know him. And actually, you guys should have him on this show, because it will be a legendary episode. You will not stay on topic. You will talk about everything, and you will be in pain from laughter. But actually, like, the only reason that we have any form of semblance of what you would call acting in The Endless ourselves is because we got to watch some of our best, what we think of as some of the best performers that we've ever seen, and luckily even met. We got to see them do it. We got to see them do the takes that ended up on the editing room floor, and we learned from it. So, like Vinny, actors.
Yeah. Well, I'll say too, you've learned very well, because you carried that movie. You were the leads, and holding down the director chair and the acting duties. Brilliant job.
Well, once again, sorry about the announcement in the background there. It's kind of part of our podcast shtick. It's Essay's podcast. If you listen to his, it should win like a fucking Peabody or something like that. But our podcast is library announcements and dick jokes. So we spared you dick jokes throughout the entire podcast. So that's an honor. I don't think we've done that for anybody before, but well, thanks for being on the podcast. I know you guys are probably super tuckered out from running around all over the place and doing your screenings and podcasts and whatnot. I have the highest hopes for you for your release. I hope it does as well as I think it's going to do on June 26th. So
thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate you giving us some of your time, and I'll be in touch as Bradley has said. And who knows, if you feel like talking about all sorts of movies and you're open to it, I'd love to talk to you guys again.
We'd love it too, man. Thank you.
And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And in the wings is a Hellbent for Horror book entitled Screaming for Pleasure. I'm currently writing it, and we're shooting for a release in the fall of 2018, so spread the word and keep your eye out. More info on that later. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.